Good afternoon. My name is Mark Free at the Oregon Department of Education. It's my pleasure to share with you this little time this afternoon about the 2020 Math Standards Project, which will be forming a advisory committee starting this spring, 2019, through implementation after the board adopts in 2021. So this webinar will be recorded. All participants are muted, and so we don't cut down that background noise. But you can post questions in the question box anytime throughout the webinar, and I'm happy to pause at certain points, different sections, to try to answer questions. But also, if I don't get a chance to get to all the questions, I can post an FAQ on the Oregon Learning Network, the OEN site that we have as well. So I will try to share all that out, and let's get started. I can get this going. So overview, this is the goals of the webinar. I want to start with just setting a little context behind where we might have been in the past, the timelines, where does this review fit in the larger cycle. But also I want to share where I see the work going, how it might be different if you've been on the past panel. And also I want to give you an overview of the math panel, an example how we could create community learners even online through surveys and webinars, and then just share the expectations of the 2019-21 work. And so basically you will need to sign a contract to get any kind of like mileage or hotel reimbursement throughout the work. And so this webinar is designed to walk through the expectations you would likely see in that contract and give you a chance to ask questions, review the recording, and what the next steps were. So that is the plan. So where have we been in the past? So it's the kind of context. What's the standards work in the past have been, and where do we see the work going in the future? So just a little overview. These dates might seem familiar if you've been in the state for a while. Last time we did a content panel like this would have been in the 2007 year we adopted. So right before that was when the panel worked on standards. And so at that time, they were working with the NCTM focal points, which came out in 2006. So those standards are modeled after that document, which stopped at 8th grade. There was an idea that they might go into high school, but they did not. NCTM did not. And so we formed another committee after that to write high school standards. So that's why the high school and K-8 standards were in two different times at that period. That's about the time I started this job at the Department of Education as a math specialist in 2009. And so one of my first things I did here, I still remember it very well, was seeing this draft document of the Common Core standards. And so I spent a lot of my time the first year traveling around the state, not doing what I thought I'd do, which is I work on these standards, but getting feedback on the national set of standards, which were adopted in October of 2010. And so that kind of threw us off a little bit of our cycle, because we just did the math standards. We tried to create what we call a bridge adoption from materials that were reviewed from the prior standards, 2007-9, for publishers to give Common Core supplements. In the summer of 2015, we did a full Common Core instructional materials review from K to high school through Algebra 2. So our law does speak to timelines. So why do we review materials? So one law is the ORS, or Oregon Revised Statutes, which come from the legislature, which charge the Oregon Board of Education to review and revise academic standards on a regular schedule, and math is one of the content areas identified in that law. It does not specify a period; it just says a regular schedule and to involve stakeholders. So this work we're doing on the panel is really an attempt to engage as many stakeholders in the process, and by starting sooner and being thoughtful, hope to have a different process and experience for you as well. There is a time in the Oregon Administrative Rules, which is written by agencies such as ODE or TSPC or higher education. So there's a rule in our instructional materials chapter there that specifies a 7-year adoption cycle for instructional materials. So working from this, I propose to get off this timeline where we're trying to adopt standards every 2 or 3 years and move back onto a 7-year cycle. And so the summer of 2022 would be 7 years after 15. And that's when I said, let's get back on a cycle and not change standards all the time. And so that will push out the standards adoption process. Just important note as well that the 22 review will be able to include open education resources. We did not do it in 2015 because the law specifies that a fee must be paid, and that fee is based on the price of the material. So math teachers probably appreciate how much this is free, zero, what do we charge for? It was not clear. So made a decision to not include any open education resources in the review in 15. So since then, it took 4 years to change the law. We added a clause that the State Board of Education can waive the fee for materials that reside with an open license or public domain. So I'm anticipating that the next review will be even a little bit different by including open education resources alongside regular publishers in the state review in the summer of 22. So there's no law specifying when standards or assessments need to change in this process. So the target date that I'm aiming for right now is we want to think about adopting standards before we do materials, give enough time to give notice to publisher. So that's where these 2020-21 school year, that school year is kind of the target year to adopt math standards, hopefully in the fall. I think it's nice to adopt in the fall or winter time, because if you do in the spring or summer, then I don't want to communicate that you have to change tomorrow. So standards change, you don't have to change instruction materials. Actually, that is 2 years, 20 to 22, to start looking about how we update and review material. So kind of finishing out the cycle, the 2022-23 school year, so the year after the review, would be when districts need to update materials. They're not required to buy materials, but they do need to update, make sure they're aligned to the new standards. So there's time to update the materials, especially if our standards are similar to what they are now. That should make the process easier for K-8. High school might be a little bit different, but that's why we have 2 panels to help us guide that discussion. And then the fall, I just put the fall of 23, again, 23-24 school year, looking out is when the updated materials should be in classrooms. So from a student's perspective, so if my child is in the classroom, that is when the materials should be updated for mathematics or sooner. So you can start sooner if you like. There is a 2-year extension, so you could waive that for 2 years. So that's kind of the timeline. I just want to share this partly so like where we've been, where we're going, why 2020, and it fits into the schedule. And I have not put assessment on here because that's a conversation we'll have as the process goes along as well. We need to update our state assessments, which I anticipate my vote, this is Mark's vote on this, would be to do it sometime after teachers have a chance to update their materials instruction before we change the assessment. So that could be like the 23-24 school year possibly. So that's something we want to engage that process early, so the assessment team knows what we're talking about throughout this process. But that's the timeline, and I would point out that 2010-2020 is 10 years, so we tried to stretch it out as long as I could after this kind of national adoption cycle. And I hope to, if I had one thought, like how would I do this differently if I could go back to my 2010 self, would be to look at national standards perhaps on our review schedule. And so sticking to the schedule, I think, helps provide some consistency for districts, and think of the revision process as kind of reviewing and just tweaking and moving forward. So that's kind of the process timeline. Just kind of want to speak to a little bit of how panels might have worked in the past and how I hope to see them work in the future. So one kind of standard is not a panel size that's required, but generally we have like a classroom or 2 classrooms of teachers and stakeholders that draft and review standards. I'm really hoping this time around will be a different process in that we might, how do we engage a larger community maybe 100 people or more that we could scale up that could engage in this process. So part of this process is to share all the information with everyone applied, which was over 150 applications. And I wanted to share this webinar and give people a chance to understand the process as a first step. We will have in-person, like in the past, we generally had in-person panel meetings because that's what technology afforded us. We still will do in-person meetings as much as we can, but I also like to engage using an online community so people can be engaged throughout the state and feel connected to this group and the work without having to necessarily travel. And so hoping that will cast a larger net and represent our state very well. We generally don't have a lot of public drafts. I think if you remember in the Common Core, there was a public draft in March, and there was one in the final draft was in June. There was kind of one we had in January, so there was not many public drafts to give feedback on. And it seemed kind of frantic. I'd like to change that pace a little bit to sharing our thinking more throughout the process. So kind of an iterative design. How do we share work that's happening, provide updates? Example would be the high school math framework that I shared with high schools that were piloting, thinking about schools that were piloting new courses for high school. So we took our 200 standards in high school and brought it down to 50 or 60 core ideas. Could we do that? What would that look like? So that framework is an attempt to do that and get feedback on how feasible is this to teach the standards. So this committee will help provide feedback. I'm hoping to also get feedback by teachers doing things like piloting materials or courses and say, like, you meant for this to be 2 years, you need to cut out 10%. If we know that before the board meeting, we can do that. So thinking about different ways to engage people, not just in drafting using Google Docs, but that would be part of it. Historically, I think membership is static in the sense that once we kind of have a panel and we got all the appointment letters, it kind of sticks the same throughout the process. And I think what you notice is, life happens, people move, people don't have time to do the process, and through attrition, the group kind of gets smaller. And there really isn't opportunities for people who might have heard about this, missed the chance this spring to sign up. I heard in the summer, I'm interested. How do we get in? So I'm hoping to move more towards kind of I call it dynamic group membership. So I can't bring on new members all the time. So I'm hoping to set windows that will make sense for people to exit and join. So if you feel like you can only do a quarter or next year, so I think there's trying to build in natural points where we can have people come in. So this group is what I would consider my spring group to start with. If we had more people interested, I would start keeping track of those names and communicate with them separately and give them an opportunity to join when it makes sense, which I'll share the timeline in a little bit. And also part of this work is I think sometimes people have great intentions. They want to work on this and they might fall down on the priority list for whatever reason. And so I do expect engagement. I do expect some passion and excitement and wanting to create community. So if a panelist may not be meeting expectations, that's why I think that contract is really important to set the norms, just like you set rules or expectations at the beginning of the school year. So I think if you're not meeting, we may have a conversation about whether this might be the best work for you and give an opportunity to someone who really wants to do this. So just being fluid and just being professional and wanting to be clear about the process, how people come in and may exit. Panels are based on basically who volunteers, how many people showed up to your day one practice or something like that. I think I want to move from people who show up and who I know are great, and sometimes I love seeing them across the state, and I want to engage them in this process, but I think I really want to be more intentional this time about how the panel is set up so that voices are included in this work that may not traditionally be part of it. And so one example is I was very intentional with the elementary group to reach out to our early childhood education partners and really want to recruit and pull them in and make them feel welcome, that even though we're doing K-8 standards, we really want the early childhood and maybe possibly have an early childhood through 8th grade continuous progression. So it's not separate documents on our website. So that was intentional. I want professors and post-secondary faculty to feel welcome as well. So professors who may teach, especially entry-level math courses or do responsible for placement. Those are two areas I definitely wanted to engage in, and we have pretty good representation to start off with. But we may realize we may need more members, and so we may need to reach out and recruit, especially if we're talking about different types of expertise, maybe content area like statistics, maybe bring an expert that has that expertise, making sure we have regional representation. So if I see a gap in the state map, how do we recruit someone into the process? Your professional background, and also I think your experience with culturally and linguistically underrepresented populations. I want their voice in there somehow. So I will try my best to start with, but I think you will help me make it a better panel. And so one of the things I would give example of reaching out to a group that may not have participated in the past is I'm starting conversations now with our Indian education specialists about how can we engage our tribal nations in our state in this process. And so that might mean a member joining our group to represent that voice, for example, or myself going out, or representatives who might be in that region going out and meeting with tribal governments in the next year and a half. So being really intentional about who we are reaching out and who our math standards serve. In the past, there's an expectation to provide feedback, and I'm happy to report that's still the same. I want you to, that's a big part of the lift, is to provide feedback, and we'll do it a variety of ways using technology, Word documents, and that maybe a little more high tech than has been in the past, but that's the core is providing feedback. And I'm hoping to have groups formed around specific topics such as first grade math or high school algebra or ratios and proportions in middle school. So you have an identity within the group that you are focusing on, a part of the standards, but are connecting with other groups. And so we all have responsibility for K-12, but we also have focus on certain areas within the standards. So we will work through that in the beginning part of this work. I would say in the past, there's limited opportunities for you to grow professionally from this work, in the sense that you provide feedback. I'm not sure, reflecting on my past panelist works that I've done last decade, I don't think I've done as good a job as I could have to grow your professional practice and just the idea of a community. And I want to change that, in the sense that there's two parts of work here. One bucket of work will be providing feedback on the standards, and the other bucket of work will be increasing your professional practice. And so I want to provide learning opportunities and ways for you to engage, and actually, hopefully by this 2 years from now, you can say that you grew as a professional, made new relationships. So, and also I want to honor that time by helping with something simple as professional development units for your license. So that's kind of the hope going forward. So I'm going to pause there because we'll just double check questions. Could I clarify what you mean by review and not what we revise, in particular in K-8? So I think review means taking the standards, looking at what there are, and taking our experience from 10 years of trying to implement it, and asking the question, how can we make these better, or can it stay the same? So I think just going standard by standard, some standards will likely, the group and the community would choose to leave it the same. Sometimes it might be revision. So I would argue that I think example of revision could be clarifying the intent. So one of the things that I want to make sure we're doing is clarifying using language that a wide variety of stakeholders can use without necessarily losing the rigor. So how can we maybe format the standards in a way that has a clear learning goal and then clarification? So that would be an enhancement, or another enhancement could be thinking about this idea of rigor. We've been talking a lot about the last 10 years. It's not in the Common Core anywhere because all that work came out after we adopted. So this idea of rigor being conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and authentic applications is something that happened in the last 10 years. So a question I would like, a discussion I anticipate would be in the revisions, like, are these ideas significant enough that they should have a presence in the standards? And so that could be a possible enhancement for that work. So that's kind of, for K8, I anticipate the feedback would be anticipating to say, I think a lot of people want to have something familiar moving forward. And so any enhancements would be to clarify and improve and better support for K8. All right, I am going to move on to the next section of the content panel work. And just to kind of frame this work, I've been thinking about a framework that I saw, I think my colleague Tom Thompson and CTE shared with us probably about 6 or 7 months ago. It's from a researcher called, his name's Michael Fullan. He's from Canada, the University of Toronto, and he actually does work around systems change in education and how do we create big change. And so the work we're going to embark on, I just would encourage you to think that the scale of this is big. We're talking about 500,000 students. We're talking about parents. We're talking about community members. So this businesses, industry. So this is something that we're talking big systems change. Why things have not happened in the past? And why is it hard to change systems? Michael Fullan argues this is his framework for the elements you would want to have present in a systems change. So I wanted to just share this framework, walk through the 4 parts, because I anticipate the work of the within the contract will be structured around these 4 pieces. So the 4 pieces the 4 elements of coherence that Michael Fullan calls is you need what we call focusing direction, cultivating collaborative cultures, deep learning among everybody in the group, and securing accountability, both internal and external. So just thinking about the framework, it's not a sequential 1, 2, 3, 4. Fullan actually uses a metaphor of a heart, a 4-chamber heart that beats the lifeblood of the school or organization. So when all 4 pieces are there, it is a strong, healthy heart. If a chamber is missing or not working as strong, it weakens the entire system. So that's kind of how Fullan thinks of these. So I want to, throughout the process, attend to each of these. We might start with talking about the purpose of the group and revisit the group throughout the work. So there might things ebb and flow with this. Coherence is really not a strategy or structure that you can put on the board and just say, I wrote this on the board and we're doing it. It's it's really about a mindset of how we work together, both individually and a group. And so I wanted to share this framework and reinforce it, hopefully, the next 3 or 4 years about how we can create systems change. So big ideas. If we want to achieve coherence, we want to achieve a system change, like if we want to change instruction or what we want to improve practice in our state, then it really takes a lot of work, takes a lot of action and interaction among a group of people. We have to help build each other's capacity. Each of us have expertise that can help each other build our knowledge. The importance of being clear. I'm reading Brene Brown book, Dare to Lead, and she has a quote of using this idea of being clear is kind. And so that's part of the goal of this webinar is to focus on clarity and being precise in our language. Transparency is important. I would just note this in state work. And so as I work in the state, everything is public. Everything is could be requested for documents. So I might not post every document or thing that we create through this panel, but if someone asked, it would be something I would share. That includes notes, words that we use to edit the different versions. And so I might post a version on the website, but all the preceding versions that might be stored could be publicly shared as well. But I generally might ask you to email me to do something like that. So even who's on the panel. So if we get that question, who's on the panel and who's working on this, I want to be able to share that with certainly my leadership and the state board, and so other stakeholders who might be interested. So that's part of the work, it's part of the commitment, and I think it serves me well so far working in the state to have that commitment to transparency. I also want to monitor progress, so how we do kind of formative assessment cycles, if you will, of our own work and correct as we go forward. So just kind of a quick overview, and this is kind of getting at this idea of maybe norms. That might be something you see in a contract, but the first domain of focus on the content panel includes how we build relationships with everyone, especially those who might not agree or disagree or be cynical of the work. And so how we engage each other is really important, that we listen and understand the perspective of others. We always have respect for views that might be expressed on this panel, and we work to create conditions that help move us all towards a common goal, common purpose. So certainly want to a commitment to being transparent, collaborative, having clear goals and strategies that we want to use, and a commitment to cultivating engagement throughout the process. And so this is engagement that would be not just for a day or two. This is kind of a marathon if we do it for 2 years. So how do we pace ourselves and engage each other over time? And so I certainly want to be sensitive to how much we might be working with each other, but also want to create goals that really impact and change our education for the better in our state. Creating collaborative cultures. This domain is really a commitment to collaboration. We seek the expertise of everyone on the panel. We want to know what your background is, what your perspective is. We honor that expertise in the way we engage each other. We may look for external sources for information, but we're not tied to an external source for our solutions. So we can certainly have the freedom to create solutions that make sense for us, which may be what someone externally is recommending. But we have the ultimate creative, collaborative culture, and I want to model that in everything we do. How we model learning, how we model development culture, how we keep the focus on learning mathematics in our state. So this will include developing common knowledge and skill base. It was interesting reading the responses from the application when I gave you a chance to share what you would like to see furthered in our state to move math education forward, and certainly you can see that there were ideas you were talking about that were similar, but having a common vocabulary and skill base that we know about and can refer to, I think will help our communication. So certainly that's going to be a big part of our work in thinking about something like a vocabulary list. Could be something we do earlier than later, so we define key terms and so we have that common knowledge and use that in our communication. Try to have a few goals and try not to have a lot of goals, and so that would be certainly a challenge as we think about how we can support the standards, but trying to keep it manageable and as few as possible, and also a commitment to the marathon, how we sustain work over a long period of time. So I'm trying to, that's the long distance runner, how we pace ourselves so we don't burn out anyone. So that's part of the collaboration commitment. So learning is a commitment for I'm looking for in the group, and really this is at the core is a commitment to being a learning panel. I think the best teachers are the ones who commit to always learning, improving their practice, and so that is certainly something I will value on this panel, an expectation that we learn and share our knowledge, apply it to real life situations. For the 5 C's, we expect it of our students, and want to develop that, and I certainly hope to expect that and develop that in our panel work as professionals, how we communicate, critically think, collaboration, certainly looking for creativity, character, and citizenship, which could be citizenship in this group, how you join this group as a member. So Folan talks about weaving through 3 different strands of expertise: pedagogy, learning environments, and digital resources as part of this commitment to learning. So how we anticipate seeing that played out is certainly we want to build a common knowledge base. We want to identify pedagogical practices and question, how do we want to communicate these as a supplementary document? It's in the standards itself. So we'll have opportunities to think about instruction and how that standards supports that work. And certainly want to build the capacity of the panelists. We have expertise, amazing expertise, years, decades of work in the States, which I incredibly value, but I was excited to see a number of teachers with less than 5 years as well, and less than 10 years wanting to do this work. And so, again, I want to build our capacity, build our knowledge. And so by the end of this, we all will be hopefully better math educators. And so we want to use technology. This webinar is an example of how we could use a technology to share information. We just had a webinar last week where we were able to get the San Francisco Unified School District to share their work about deep tracking. So we were able to host it in Salem. They stayed in San Francisco, and they were able to share their work that came from the national presentation they did this last year. So how do we use that effectively to share information? You'll probably see surveys on a regular basis. I try to keep surveys short, not very long, but it's as a tool to follow up with work throughout the process, and email as well. But I think part of my goal is to not just use those tools. So I'm talking right now with our technology team. We have a license for Canvas, which is a learning management system at the state. So if you use Canvas or Blackboard or Moodle, these are different learning management systems. So we have the ability to create a course that could be parallel to the learning we're doing. And also we could create a second course around feedback. And so we could have sections around how we provide feedback on specific standards. So I'm exploring that. I'm hoping to get answers to that soon and be ready by the end of next month, so we could have that tool as well. Accountability. Folan talks about internal and external accountability, and really the importance of internal accountability, which would be what we hold ourselves accountable for, which includes the norms and expectations, being clear. Being clear is kind. This is the expectations of the group, so that's part of this work. I think internal accountability includes things such as a commitment to combine individual and collective expectations and possibly corrective action if needed. So examples of something I think is an internal accountability. I don't have it ready right now, but I will have a survey, a short survey that would just have your name and email so I can connect surveys over time. And just a simple question: were you able to listen to this orientation either in person or online recording? So that would be a check that you've done a learning experience, and then have a reflection. So I like the 2 questions I hear a lot in our classrooms. So what do you wonder? What do you notice? Kind of question. So probably 2 questions about what you heard, and then the second question about how you connect this to this work or your work, and then having like a minimum number of words. So not looking to grade it, but something I can see is, did you learn something after a possible experience? So that could be an internal accountability, and something that would be able to follow up on if needed. So external accountability is something that's outside our group. The board presentation, and when we present to the board, is the ultimate probably external accountability in terms of if they accept it. Other external accountability would be our teachers who use the standards and their expectations, and also other stakeholders like politicians or assessments that could have interest in standards as well. So there could be how we communicate with external partners is part of the work, but really the driver is what we hold as our group internally. So I'm going to pause there. If there are any questions, I'm going to check. Okay, I don't see questions at a time, so feel free to post a question in the chat box. I'm seeing a hand, April and Kathy. If you want to type something in the chat or the questions, you can do that. Okay. I think I will, if you're able to, yeah, so one question, will the presentation to the board be? I don't have a specific date when the presentation, it has to be, well, I'm targeting the 2020-21 school year. The board meetings are in October and December, and then January and every month through June. So it has to do first read and adoption. So the soonest would be first read October, adoption December 2020, which is why I kind of use the 2020 standards. It could be in the winter, sometime after that if we need more time. Question, will there be work in the summer? Yes, there could be work in the summer as well. So I will go through in the next section kind of how much work, and I certainly understand things happen, vacations or you know, we had no parental leave and things like that happen, life happens. So if something comes up, I would just expect to let me know throughout the process. So yeah, we're going to be working through the summer, and that's probably when we're going to have the in-person meetings. So do I sort of foresee problems in managing in a fairly large group? I think there will be, yeah, it's going to be challenging. I certainly anticipate challenges. How do we engage the group? That's part of the reason why I'm thinking about how we use best practices like online courses in college, the Canvas course, so we can create sections, create smaller groups. And so I'm hoping through that process to learn as we go. So I will talk about the in-person and larger group in the next section. All right. I will go to the next section and see if I answer some of your questions that just came in. So just quickly, I want to show an example of how we could manage information that comes from a large group of people, like 150 people, and use this in a way that you're not just telling me information, but I'm using it in a way to tell you and give you back information about what I'm hearing. So the example I'm going to use is just your responses to the application. These were the 62 K-8 applicants that I was able to get through before this meeting. I'm almost done with high school, but I have not gotten through all that work. So I went through and highlighted what I saw as themes, and these are 27 different ideas that you have identified in some way across all your responses. So just being clear, like I saw someone, like if I saw something like hands-on learning, I coded that as like active learning, this idea of students actively participating, which can be visually or kinesthetically, but it's actually also could include engagement in choosing the learning goals themselves. So it could be how are they actively participating in that. So that was a language choice. So that's how I did example of coding. So 27 ideas came across, like if we did these things, math could be improved. Here are the top 12. Going for top 10, but there were some ties in the top 12. So when I look at this work, I think, so they think, what's the work of the panel? What I find interesting in the top 12 is not just what's here, it's what's not here. I don't think anyone really talked a lot about standards. and I just put that in the room in space. If we want further education, I think standards are understood. They're there. So the work we're doing, standards is important. But I want to also acknowledge that I see this as the work as well. How do we develop concepts in our students? And so maybe that's needs to be represented in the standards. Maybe it's a support. So this is what I see as the work of the panels, talking about issues like this. And I can even, by frequency, can tell you which ones were the most frequent. And so I can present a list like this. I tried to make a survey, actually, to kind of see how you thought, but the survey doesn't work more than four questions in this webinar. So I need to figure out how to make it, if it makes it more. But we can work on prioritizing. So I want to do a better job of sharing what I heard and giving it back to you and helping me understand, is this what you see as connected? So certainly some things like the top one was NCTM principles action, working with teachers to help them understand high leverage instructional strategies such as that was identified by over half of the elementary applicants. So I heard a lot about discourse, how students talk with each other, reasoning, how they problem solve, how we develop concepts that lead to procedures. Certainly some things like active learning could be considered an instructional practice. So there's some nuances. So this is kind of example of one question and the information that came out of it, and something I would like to be able to turn on quickly and feed it back to the group in a way that can move the work forward. So this is hopefully a two-way communication street. And I just would point out one other like wording, math modeling and representations. I use those specifically in a sense, like there's this NCTM annual on math modeling and modeling mathematics. One's idea is the modeling cycle, the verb, how we take a real life application and solve it through this kind of modeling process versus how do we represent mathematics. So that could be something, a language that I'd like to work on and define, and maybe when we look at reviewing the standards, look at the word model. When we use the word model, what type of modeling are we talking about? And so maybe a better way to be clear is to use the word representation if we're talking about like pictorial or concrete representations. So we reserve that modeling word for that real life application. So that could be an example of a word that is used interchangeably now in our standards that could be an enhancement or clarification for our teachers in the field. All right, I will like to run through, time we got time check, 15 minutes. And so before, I want to make sure I have enough time to go through the expectations of the content panel. So when you see a contract, we call it a appointment letter. This is kind of what the language I will anticipate in that agreement. So one is kind of thinking about time commitment. So one of the questions was, how much time would this involve? And so I'm thinking to sustain this work throughout, and it would require regular intervals, regular touch points. And so I'm hoping if I can get to the end of the 2 years and we average it out for all the weeks, that would average out to something like a little over 1 hour per week. That's kind of my target. So maybe less than 2. So sometimes I think will be less hours, and sometimes might be more, such as summers would probably be less. But overall, that's kind of my target, and you can give me feedback as if I'm not hitting that target. But that's kind of my goal, and certainly give you opportunities to do more than that if you have time. The phases, so this is kind of breaking up the work into different phases. I'd seen the first phase right now. How do we establish the panel? How we have some goals, some norms, get used to technology. If we're going to use Canvas, how do we get logged in and just get used to that environment and start some learning practices in that group. We might create sections in there so groups can stay smaller than 150, so you don't have to, it's kind of like different classes in the same section in college. So I want to get kind of a lot of the procedural contracts and norms and goals work done between now and this summer. So the August is kind of the cutoffs are coincide with what I anticipate to be in-person meetings. So having a subgroup meet in August, and I'll talk more about how I anticipate that subgroup being identified. So that's the first phase. The second phase will be doing a lot of work. I think reviewing a lot of the work of reviewing, reading, and so you'd be probably looking at sections of the standards. I think that's probably one of the heaviest lift it's going to be. So phase one will be probably slower start, kind of work our way into it. I think the phase two kind of starts the fall and winter will probably be the most work, or a lot of work. And then the March of 20 would coincide with a in-person meeting where we can agree on a public draft that we could share on our website for the math community to review. So that phase three will be probably slower in a sense because we will have put the public draft on our website and kind of review feedback as it comes in. So it kind of ebbs and flows. August will be another meeting where we can take that feedback and come up with a document that will be shared to the state board that fall. So the work that fall 2020, kind of August 2020 to December would be just supporting whatever we need for that board review and adoption process. And so I anticipate that being a little bit less, and then probably working into our way phase five, which is implementation. So I think there are going to be standards, words we need the board to adopt. We need to focus on that and get that adopted. There are things we can use to clarify. So what do we mean by the math practices in grade 4 could be a clarification that we include as support. That work could happen either in that fall during the board adoption, but definitely that last phase will be writing more work. So I think if you want to pace yourself out, that phase 2 and phase 5 will probably be the most work as far as time commitments. And I'm hoping to kind of ebb and flow. That makes sense. And each of them phases would correspond with a in-person meeting. So how do I see the in-person online panels? I want to just be clear that this is, I'm very sensitive to the idea that, we can create status or subcultures. Like I'm a in-person panelist or I'm just an online panelist. Like I really view you all as a team, and some people will have an opportunity to do in-person meetings, which will be determined by a couple factors I'll share. But just my metaphor I was thinking about is thinking about sports, and I love football. That's kind of one of my favorite sports. I like baseball and track and field and wrestling. So there's a lot of different sports. I like volleyball too. I love the team aspect of sports. And what I think, I guess, when I thought about football in particular is maybe it's the size of the stadium and how few people are on the field at one time. And it really does take a lot of people to make a team work. We have specialists that come in. We have kickers or punchers on a football team. We might have someone who is called in for a certain play or giving rest to someone who needs it. And so you might have 11 people on the team, but it's rarely going to be the same 11 people all the time. And so I just imagine a football coach or any coach of a sport that had 150 people show up the first day of practice and say, we can only have 12 people on the field or 11 people on the field. Here's the 11, the rest of you can go home. So it's like, I don't think that team would do very well. Those people will be very tired and people will be injured, and you won't have 11 people sometimes. And so what makes more sense is, how do we work together? How do we develop a sense of a team? How do we practice and learn? And maybe if we have a group of 30 people who can meet in person, who's available could be a real practical consideration, and who's able to be on that field. So I think of the in-person as who is on the field, but we're all part of the same team. So what would I look for? And part of this work is I'm not trying to identify the in-person right away, because I want to get to know people. And I think one of the things I want to get to know through this work is I really value passion and knowledge. I certainly value knowledge, your content knowledge, general knowledge in math education, but you can also have specific knowledge of a content area, of a region, a linguistic need of our students, of a population that you want to bring into the conversation as well. So sometimes what can happen is you have a very knowledgeable person who just is not interested in the work, or just they're very busy because they're very knowledgeable, and this kind of drops off, and so they don't hear from them or don't show up to the meetings, the in-person ones. So I think passion is something, knowledge I think we can teach, knowledge we can grow. I have a growth mindset, we can increase our capacity and knowledge. Passion is something that you have. The responses, so if we give you a chance to reflection, are you doing one-word responses, or are you really doing insightful, thoughtful responses? Are you showing up to the meetings or watching the recordings on a regular basis? Are you passionate about a topic? How's that? So certainly that combination is really what I like to see. So I'm going to give a couple opportunities to see for you to learn, to reflect, and so everything's a formative assessment. So how you respond to those is certainly something I'll be looking at, as well as thinking about regional representation. So if I can get another region in by putting, if I'm trying to decide between two people, I will always want to try to maximize our regional representation, our cultural representation. I certainly value experience, but I also value that hard work as well. And real practically, you can who's available for the meetings could be consideration. So my goal is to have 3 in-person meetings. So I'm working on right now. I'd like to have our panel meetings in August be close to the OCTM Oregon Math Leader Conference, because I think that could be a shared learning experience and take advantage of that in August. So the Oregon Math Leader Conference in McMinnville is in August 2nd and 3rd. And so if I thought about ahead of time, I might have been able to think about before the meeting, but I'm coming in from vacation right before Oregon Math Leaders. So looking for dates right after that, so we can have a professional learning experience and a content panel, kind of take advantage of that experience. So it's not 2 different trips for people. And then for August 2020, I'd like to take advantage of that same conference for those dates. So that is the 4th and 5th is a Sunday and Monday, because the conference is on a Friday, Saturday. So one of the questions after the survey will be your availability on those dates. So we're looking for locations in the McMinnville-Salem area for that time. March will be determined. I kind of want to do it after the storms. A lot of storms this winter, so location probably in the Salem area. There will be substitutes needed for that one, but the group size I'm kind of aiming for to start small and work our way up is kind of my logic. I want to not start with a large group and try to manage it. I can manage a classroom, 30 people to start with, and I think how we grow that to something maybe like to 2 classrooms, like a K-8 in high school in March, and then even more in August of 2020, so it's farther out. So if I can find a way to get everybody there in the August one, that would be fantastic. And I would have to be in the summer if we had a large group like that, because the substitute expenses increase the cost of the meeting dramatically. So that March 2020 would have to probably be that size, but probably the biggest I can get. So again, the 4 components of full-in is kind of, I'm expecting that would be some language like that in the appointment letter. So commitment to the mission, vision, objectives. Collectively, let's make the mission together. And once we have it, we have a commitment to that mission, vision, and we are demonstrating respect and the capacity to listen and understand perspective of others throughout the process. So that's certainly that first component. Commitment to collaboration to sustain the work over time. So that again is 2 years is a long time, and certainly there are times when you might not be able to do it, and you just need to communicate that to me. So either you are collaborating, or you're letting me know you need to something happened and you need a break. So either way, you're committed to collaboration, and you're letting me know. What I don't want is just people disappearing and having to find them after a couple months of not hearing from them. So that's a commitment to collaboration. The commitment to learning is I want to create learning experiences. So that is this idea of webinars. I'm kind of playing with the idea of an Oregon Math Project Academy that could happen at least once a month. So 1 hour of that work 1 week would be a webinar and a reflection survey that we would try to create a process that would give you a PDU for that experience once you complete the survey, and also participation in the Canvas course. So when I was teaching online courses, we would have a question and have an expectation that everybody either does a response to the question or respond to someone else, kind of expectation. So that if you taught an online course in college, that could be something we would kind of gauge engagement in that Canvas course. And also accountability, so commitment to the individual and collective expectations. This is a voluntary. You always have a choice how much you can engage, but I think that commitment to the individual and team is something certainly I would want to expect as part of this, and also have processes for due process for any communication or change. So I don't want to kick anyone off, screw up once. That's not my intent. I just would want to communicate and understand the situation, and maybe if finding a course correction that would fit your schedule, or just work with you to decide what the best solution will be. So I just want to put that out there, that this part of the work will be to engage in this work throughout the 2 years. So next steps, last 5 minutes. Let's see if I can find the next steps. So the first step is simply you done the first step. You applied. You're in. If you got an email linked, you are in the database for submit an application. So the first step will be to watch the recording. So if you're live right now, good job, you're on. So you don't have to watch it again. If you're not on this, you're not able to join this, you will. I'll give a recording link, and I'll try to use something like YouTube, so make it easy to play on a computer. So that will be either live or recorded. There will be a survey that I will send out with a recording by the end of this week. That will have really simple questions like, did you self-report? Did you attend or listen to the recording? I do get who actually shows up for the conference as part of the webinar. So I do have a roster of people who actually show up and are engaged in this platform. So I do know that, but this will be part of the kind of a post-survey reflection. So once I get that survey, you watch the recording, you had a reflection, those will be the people I will send appointment letters to. So I'm aiming to complete this review, give you reasonable time, like 2 weeks, at least a week or two, to do something like that. And then I will send out letters the week of April 8th, which is when I'm coming back from the National Math Conferences. So I would give you hopefully a reasonable time, like 2 to 3 weeks, to review the appointment letter and to sign it and send it back. And so once we have that, then everyone can have an appointment letter. And so everyone could theoretically be on an in-person one. So that's the kind of the next person up attitude of a team. If we have a gap and someone has to drop out last minute, I could put out a call to or ask someone to join us, and because you have the appointment letter, you'd be ready to go. So I want to get sure everyone's ready to go. And then you would, if we get the Canvas course, to complete the course registration and just set up the profile and kind of new experience for me, and help me work through what that learning experience would be for a context like this. So that's kind of the next steps. I will look at it, and so maybe the 150. I don't know how many people will complete the survey, but that will be I will send. That's an example of internal accountability to get to the next step. So try to keep it simple enough so it doesn't take a lot of time. I will have a meeting next month, actually, so April. I will send the link out with the recording. I have Achieve is able to share on their report where they did analysis of all the state standards since Common Core in English, language arts, and mathematics, and kind of done a state-by-state guide of what changed, what's the same, how, and did they make it stronger, did they make it weaker, and so they did the analysis and the report, and so the math specialist there will share that report. I will send the link registrations. That will be on April 23rd, which is a Tuesday, from 3:30 to 4:30 Pacific time. And I think I look for additional webinars. I have several in the pipeline that I'm looking for to do, and so I think one of the webinars is per month is what I would hope. And if we get to more than one, maybe we have a K8 and a high school one. And so you will have an option to watch the second one if you want. So if we have more than one webinar, that'll be optional. You're welcome to join. Like an example would be the detracking webinar we did with San Francisco Unified. I'll post the recording. That's my pilot trying to figure out how to make this work and provide PDU. So you're welcome to take advantage of learning like that. Other optional opportunities like the Oregon Council Teacher Mathematics, Math Leader Conference in Linfield in August will be an opportunity. I'll be there, and I hope to encourage panelists to be there as well, to have that shared learning. Oregon State is on their third year of doing an ambitious teaching and learning institute, which I don't have the dates yet because I think they're trying to figure out if it's a 3 or 4 day institute in Corvallis, but that could be something where if you can make it to Corvallis, then you can attend the institute basically, and if there's space. So that is in its third year, and I think it would be great to share learning experiences like this that you can take advantage of that we might be at as a panel to connect with each other. So just last, three panels, August 4, 5. So anticipate question on survey about that if you can. And then this says reimbursements. You need an appointment letter for reimbursements. It's considered volunteer commitments, so we're not going to pay stipends. Mileage and food for in-person and lodging and substitutes would be eligible for reimbursements if it's during substitutes the meeting happened during the school year. Non-monetary, certainly. The cost associated with Canvas, we want to pay for that, and PDUs, and certainly just the opportunity to engage in this conversation and support something that all our teachers who teach mathematics will look at and use in the coming years. So I hope that is something you excites you and gets you interested in this work. So I am going to stop there. I know it's 5 o'clock. And so I think I answered most of the questions. So when's the first wave of team? I'm aiming for by end of April, so mid to late April, depending on when I can offer the in-person meetings to those who complete the appointment letters. Can the webinar begin at 4 to 5? Because we have teaching duties. That's certainly flexible. I think that's something we could decide early in this work, what time works best. It'll be, especially when we're talking about next school year, I hope to have something that's on a regular schedule so you can anticipate it. So I will, we can discuss that. That first one is just going to be 3:30 to 4:30 on April 23rd. All right, I think I want to pause there. I know it's 5, I'm looking at the time, it's a little bit after 5 o'clock. I won't honor your time, so I'm going to end there. So any questions, feel free to type in now, and I will download those and include them in Q&A if I can. So thank you for participating. So next steps, look for a link to the recording and survey, and also we'll include the registration for the April 23rd Achieve presentation next month in April. So, all right, thank you and have a great evening.